Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of Stop Doing the Side Splits, Maybe. Sorry it's taken me a while to get this second volume out, but I've been very busy moving to the other side of the planet and a lot of other things. So anyway, I had a lot of questions, obviously, as you may have seen. I've had hundreds, if not, I don't know if I got into the thousands of comments yet, but lots and lots of comments, lots of interest, lots of questions as to this concept. Of course, if you haven't watched Volume 1, watch that first, otherwise this may not make total sense. So I've linked that in the below in the description to see Volume 1. This is a follow-up, okay? One of the main questions I kept getting was, a lot of people kept saying, the only reason you're not able to do the splits is because you're not doing it correctly, okay? Now, I don't understand actually how they came to this conclusion. I'm assuming they didn't watch the whole video, at least didn't pay attention to the whole video. Because what I did was 2 different types of splits, okay? Oh, I didn't actually do the splits, but I showed you the way you could do them. I can't do the side splits. I can't do any splits. I'm relatively flexible, but I'm not extremely flexible. So what I said was, there are 2 different ways to put your leg effectively into a side split position. You can use this motion, moving your leg to the side. No one, to my knowledge, can do the splits like that, okay? It's impossible. That is purely abduction, okay? Whereas if you lift your leg up in the front and then open to the side, this is where some people can do the side splits. Now, I demonstrated this by sitting on the floor. I sat on the floor and started to open my legs outwards. This is the correct way to do the side splits. A lot of people, I think maybe the reason they thought I was doing it incorrectly is because I didn't mention about the tilting of the pelvis forward, like so. You only have to tilt the pelvis forward if you're doing an upright standing position. If you want to go into the splits by letting your feet go out this way, you have to tilt the pelvis in order to go down. What this effectively does is, it puts your body, your hips, in the same position as if you were to sit on the floor and open your hips sideways. So we're using external rotation for the main part to open the leg out. So by sitting on the floor and opening your legs out sideways, this will create the biggest range of motion that your body can manage. Whereas lifting them straight out to the sides will be the most limiting range of motion, which I explained in the previous video, but I wanted to clarify that, and I'll show you with the prop in a moment. So I hope you can see then that the way that I showed it in the previous video, the second variation of how to do the side splits, or ways of doing the side splits, was in fact the correct way. It's the same variation that anyone else, all the other videos on YouTube where they're specifically teaching you the correct way to do it. My videos here, including the previous one and this one, are not teaching how to do the side splits. It's not a lesson. It's an explanation as to if you can't do it, this could be the reason. So stop pushing because you're going to break your joints. Now, all the other experts out there, that's another common thing that I was getting in these in the comments in my video. A lot of people were saying like, oh, just watch this video and you'll see that actually anyone can do the splits. And it's funny because they must have missed the fact that in the video, the guy clearly states, even with the correct alignment, some people will still not be able to do a full side split. So all the other people out there, the experts at least, not just the people who are just pushing, everyone can do it. Those people clearly know nothing about anatomy. But the people who are really going into the scientific detail of the anatomy of how to do a correct side split, everyone I've watched, they've all stated that even with the correct alignment, some people may only manage a triangle side split, or just not a full 180-degree side split. So we're all in agreement here. Some people are limited to their range of motion because of the positioning of their hip joint, the angles in their bones. The thing that I wanted to note was, all the other people that I've seen talk about these principles, they have used the phrase, most people will be able to do a full side split with the correct alignment. However, some people may not. I've used the opposite of that. I've said most people won't get a full side split without damage, whereas some people have the correct hip alignment and they may be able to go into the full side split without doing their self-damage. Now, I said that based on my own personal experience. I'm sure these other guys have said that based on their personal experience. So what that means is, in my years teaching, I've been teaching the martial arts for almost 20 years now, so I've been involved with movement and that kind of stuff for a long time. In my experience, through doing tests on my individual students, I have found more often than not that people's hips are limiting their movement. Whereas the other guys, maybe for whatever reason, they've found the opposite. The type of people coming to them happen to have more mobile hips, so they've found the opposite. But I don't know of any actual clinical study which is done either way. So let's just forget about that. Let's not say most and some. Let's just say there are definitely some, regardless of how many there are. I don't know how many there are. But let's say that some people cannot do side splits. Anyone who tells you that everyone, regardless of their hip positioning, can do the side splits doesn't know how a hip joint works. Okay, so here's our little hip prop. Now, with the limited position splits that I was explaining about before, lifting the legs straight to the side, you'll see what contacts. This bit here, you see? It's not the neck of the femur, it's not in here. That's the neck of the femur in there. That's not touching. You can see that's not touching in there, right? You see that? The neck of the femur is not touching on the bone. It's this part up here, I've forgotten the name of that one, but that bone there is whacking on there. So that gives very, very limited positioning of the hip. It's not going to go far at all, okay? Now, if I rotate the hips forward, the pelvis forward, if I tilt the pelvis forward, now you can see, I'll just have to show you from a different angle, so you can see in there, you can see now this big knobbly bit isn't touching anymore, right? So we've created more space. However, you can see that the neck of the femur, which is here, is now touching. So the bump stop up here is no longer touching. I've created more space, but there is still a point at which the neck runs into the ball, the socket, okay? So there's a point which it physically, you can hear it clunk, see? It won't go any further. If you push it further, the ball's going to come out, okay? So there's no other way about it. Now, in that position, now as I mentioned in the previous video, I only have a one-sided hip. I am going to get a bifull skeleton at some point. So if I do, I'll do another lesson so you can see with even more detail. So it's kind of hard for me to say, well, okay, is a real hip exactly this angle or this angle? You know, if you had the whole skeleton, you'd be able to see a little bit better in detail. But anyway, if you look at a skeleton, you can always see through this hole, meaning that it's got to be aimed this way. It should, if I went like that, you can't see through the hole. Therefore, this is not angled correctly. It's always like that. The socket part, this hole here, is generally angled toward the front of the body. It's sort of maybe around about the 45-degree mark to the front. It's not sitting here. It doesn't sit like that on the side. That's not how a ball and socket joint works. It sits there at the 45. So, at that, I'm trying my best to sort of hold that in a position where that would be equivalent to my hip sitting there like so. That's my right hip, okay? So that's to the front like so, okay? Now if I put that back in there, like we've already said, if I lift this up, hang on, just let me get the correct alignment without moving it, okay? So that, and this part's got to be like a little bowl, you see? So again, if I went like that, it's not a bowl anymore, you see? So it's got to be shaped something like about there-ish. So at that angle, if I lift this up, there's the limit. It can't go any further than that. So that's not very far at all. If I try my best to hold it exactly as it is, if I tilt it forward to there, now watch, it'll go a little bit further, but there's still a limit. It's still going to hit the neck. If I go further again, maybe it'll go a touch further, but basically there is still a massive limit, there's still the neck hitting the bone. There's nothing you can do about that. It will come out if it goes any further. Look at the anatomy of it. There is a ball-shaped object inside a socket-shaped object. Mathematically, it can't just keep going without falling out of the joint. It's impossible. Doesn't matter what angle you put the pelvis at, or how far you tilt it forward, a ball and socket joint has to come out in order to get to a certain angle. Now, of course, how far you can go is all dependent, like I've already explained, but I just wanted to clarify it. It's all dependent on this angle here. There's some small things that can change about the actual pelvis angles as well, but the main thing will be this here, the neck of the femur and the angle of it. So a femur with a straight leg, if your leg is straight down and not feet together, like if you put your feet at shoulder width, it means that the tilt will be about 10 degrees open. So that's actually the leg actually goes like that, right? So the leg at this angle is actually a straight leg if you look at a skeleton correctly. Now, if I take that same angle upwards, therefore, the femur does not have to be at 90 degrees to be doing a full 180 split. So 90 and 90 creates 180, okay? This only has to be about here to create that would actually be a full side split with the angle there. But this is still very much aiming down. The socket is still up here, so it's still falling out. You're still going to jar the neck into the bone like I just showed you earlier. If the angle of this, I'm just going to use my hands now because I don't have any different hip joints. So there's the femur, right? That's the bone, and my fist here is going to represent the ball, like the socket, the neck of the femur, and so on. So, if, as I showed in great detail in my previous video, this angle can vary on different people. If your angle of the neck of the femur is like this, so a very shallow angle, right? There's the socket over the top of it. It means you can lift it up to here, and it's still going to be in the socket, isn't it? Right? So that's fine. You can do a side split. However, if the angle is like this, a very sharp angle, and I close it in, and I pull it up to that same angle, it's not in there anymore. The whole front part of the socket of the ball is aiming down, so it's going to fall out. So we don't want the ball to come out of the socket. I have seen some people who actually advocate we have to stretch the tendons so far to allow the ball to come out of the socket. Personally, I very much disagree with that. Your joints are not meant to detach like that. You're effectively dislocating your joint to go further. I 100% disagree with that. You're going to cause yourself an injury at some point. Anyway, this would be regarded, this angle would be regarded as a problem, right? We've got a problem in the hip. I explained greatly in the previous volume about that. This would be regarded as a problem in the hip. You'll probably have pain. You'll have problems with your body if you have one of those two angles. This is regarded as normal. However, this is still normal, and this is still normal, right? So anywhere in this kind of range is still regarded as normal. It's not going to cause you any problems. It's only when you go really to the extreme of one end, then you might start to manifest some problems. Which means that if you have this positioned hip, you can do the side splits. But if you have this positioned hip, you can't do the side splits, but you have nothing that would tell you that you can't do the side splits. The only thing that will tell you is trying to do side splits and feeling some pain in the hip, in the bone, because you're getting that neck of the femur crushing on the bone. So you're not going to feel like, oh, I clearly have a problem with my hip, therefore maybe I should look into it. Even if you feel 100% perfectly healthy, you're the fittest person in the world, you've never had a problem with your body, you might have a certain angle in the femur neck that will not allow you to do the side splits. So I think we can all agree there's no argument for the hip continuing. Everyone has to agree on the fact, it's fact, that there is a point which the hip stops. There's no doubt about that. That is an absolute fact. There is a point where the hip stops and it cannot go further. If there is a point where the hip can't go further, therefore, there has to be variations. If one person can do a lot, another person won't be able to do as much. Okay, some people may do a lot, even past maybe, if they've got a very funny shaped hip. But my point is, as I say, I'll correct myself in saying I don't know how many, what the percentage of people who can or can't do this, because I haven't done a study on it. I don't think anyone has actually done a study on it. However, there are definitely, without question, people out there who can't do the side splits. For those people, and you don't know if you're one of those people or not, this is the problem with the side splits. If you are one of those people, you're going to damage your hip if you try to do the side splits. If you're not one of those people, great, you can do the side splits all day long. You won't cause yourself any problems. My lessons here are to advise you that if you feel something stopping you, like I explained in the previous video, I told you what to feel for. If you're feeling stretch in the muscles, you can go further. If you're feeling pressure, like bone on bone, you can't go further. Or you may need to reposition, then you can go a bit further and so on. So I've already explained that. I won't go over that again. So yes, I do take back my comment where I said most people can't do side splits. It's possible that most people can't. It's just that I haven't done an actual study on it, therefore I don't have facts to back that up, so I take back that statement. However, I stick with my statement where I said some people can't. Okay? Some people cannot do the side splits no matter what you do. I mean, they can. Sorry, what I mean is they can't do it without damaging their bodies. Okay, the over splits. I've had a number of people ask, or not really ask a question, but make a statement to say that if I can do over splits, how is it that anyone else can't at least do normal splits? Again, they have no idea of what their hips are doing. Okay, so just again showing you using my own leg, not that I can actually do the splits. When people do over splits, they don't lift their leg out this way and go over the 180-degree mark. What they do is, they'll do the splits correctly to start with, which as I explained before, is this action, you see. So if I open my legs out this way, you've got to try to imagine that because I can't do the splits myself. But if I open my leg out this way, right, when people talk about over splits, I'll just use my arms to demonstrate. Here's me going into the splits, right? So that's me now in a full split. When people talk about over splits, they don't talk about this. That would be a true over split because you're going past in the same direction as where you were already going as far as the hip joint is concerned. What people do is they go into here, over split, because they're sitting in an upright position. They're not talking about over splits going behind them. They're talking about over splits going up, like you see people with their feet on blocks. But that's an upward motion. So they've opened their legs out, then they go up. They don't go further back. So again, if we do that same motion, if we take the hip socket here, pop that in, lift the knee up in front of us, so that would be this motion, you see. Then I rotate the leg out, as I just explained. But now to go into over splits, I don't keep going. See, that's going to pop the joint out again. I go up. That's just a rotation within the socket. So over splits, you're not actually putting any more pressure on the hip joint than a normal split because you're literally doing this. It's rolling in the socket. You're just moving the hip up and down. You're not moving it further into that angle which it doesn't like. Another common question that I got was some people were saying, how can you say that the hip joint has this limitation when the shoulder doesn't? And they're both ball and socket joints. So your shoulder has so much range of motion. There's no problem. The shoulder can go way past like a 180-degree angle. It can go right back here. Okay? So the shoulder is very, very mobile. The shoulder is not a true ball and socket joint. It's called a ball and socket joint, is the closest thing to it, but it is not the same type of ball and socket joint as your hip. Let me show you with my hands again. This is your femur and your femur head, okay? The ball. Here's the socket. It goes inside. It's encapsulated in here, like I was showing you with the other one. You can see look at a skeleton. You can see it inside the socket, which means that if you try to go, it's going to pop out. It can pop out, okay? It's a deep ball and socket. The shoulder, on the other hand, it's similar in this section, but the socket is totally different. The socket is classed as a shallow ball and socket joint. Okay, so instead of being like this, it's something more like that, for example. So there's still a little bit of an indentation. It's still a socket-ish, but it's a flat socket. I actually think of it more as being a ball and plate. So if that goes on there, it means it can move to whichever angle it wants to. See, it's got much more freedom to move around. It's not locked in to here. This is why we can dislocate our shoulder so easily. If it was totally encapsulated in there, it'd be very difficult to dislocate the shoulder. But because it's just a little plate like that, the shoulder is not held in position by the joint itself. The shoulder is held in position purely by the muscles and tendons. Okay? So this is why the shoulder joint can so easily be displaced. It can move, because it can literally do this. If you, for example, you'll see a lot of people with slouched shoulder. You can have a problem in here where the shoulder joint itself, because it's like this, the shoulder joint itself can actually sit here or sit here. So it's not in the center of the socket. A hip joint can't do that. Because it's encapsulated, it can't move. It can't physically move. It can either come right out or it can't sit in a different position because it's locked in there. If it's not locked in there, it can move. You see, it can literally move around. So it requires the correct amount of tension in all the different muscle groups around the shoulder to hold the shoulder in the perfect position. If one of those is really, really tight and the other is very, very weak, it can actually move the joint to the wrong position. So this is why we get so many problems with our shoulders, because it's designed for mobility. We need it to have mobility so we can, scratch our back and things like that. Whereas the hips, they're designed, they hold our body up. We jump on them, we move around. They're designed to hold our body. So they've got constant heavy pressure on them at all times. So they are designed for stability. They're still quite a mobile joint. They're not that immobile. They're still probably, they're probably still the second most mobile joint. Like other joints, they have a much stronger limitation. They only have one range of motion, one direction. The hip joint can still move in all directions. It doesn't matter where, it can go anywhere. But there will definitely be a limitation at some point for some people. Okay, I did already show this in the previous one, but so many people asked the question, so I don't know how they missed it, but I thought I'd just cover it again in this one. Front splits. Okay, that's my hip, right? When my leg moves out to the front, like as if I'm doing a front split, right? It means the hip is going to do this. All right, can you see anything stopping the hip from moving? No. The ball, in theory, it can go all the way around there's no bone-on-bone contact, no matter where it goes in an up, forward and backwards motion. It can go as far as it wants in that axis. When we go to the side, that's when we have problems. That's where you can't go anywhere but where it's limited to. But forward, it's just the muscle structures that obviously your hip can't go full full 360, based on the muscle structures. You'd have to tear all your muscles off to be able to do that. So, with reference to your hip joint, there is nothing wrong with doing front splits, okay? Your joints, you will not get any bone-on-bone clunking. Again, there could be something out there that I don't know. Maybe there's certain funny things in a very small percentage of people that could cause a problem, but generally, I've never seen in my experience, and I've never heard of, anyone having trouble from doing the front splits. So I would say that that's a safe thing to do. Okay, there is one other problem though with front splits that might cause you a problem. This doesn't have it, this is just the bones. But straight in the center of that ball, there is a tendon which actually goes straight into there, okay? And then that comes out of there. It literally holds your hip in. So you've got all the surrounding muscles obviously supporting and holding, that's the strength part of it. But it's like a little string coming out of here that holds it into there, okay? So this is something called the Ligamentum Teres. My pronunciation may not be 100% correct on that, but it's a little tendon that basically goes straight into the center of your ball socket, the ball of the socket, and that pulls in and holds the ball in the socket. That's like right inside the joint, okay? Now, because of the way that goes in there, just grab my hip again, actually. Okay, because of the way that goes in there, it goes straight through the center, like that, right? So if you twist this too far, you're twisting that tendon, right? You're not just stretching the tendons, you're twisting it in a spiraling kind of motion. Now, it's said, I have heard and read a few articles that this can cause problems. Perhaps maybe if they go into it too fast or they don't allow the thing to stretch slowly or something, it can cause you a problem. You can tear that ligament. However, my argument against this, I would say that, again, I could be wrong on this one. I have not studied that particular ligament and the ins and outs of it 100%. However, we all know, like I regard myself as not being super flexible, right? I'm relatively flexible, but what I mean by that, I've never put hours and hours and effort into becoming more flexible. I've done my general training of doing kicks and so on in the martial arts, so that's naturally made me a little bit more flexible than the average person. But I don't do all the hours of stretch. So I'm just normal flexibility. But everyone can basically lift their leg up, right? You can lift your knee up to your chest without too much trouble. Most people can do that. You're basically already doing the splits when you do that. Okay, so I regard myself, as I said, as not being that flexible. I can put myself into a splits position. Now, I can't do the splits, but my hips can. So if I sit up like this, right? There we go, I'm doing the splits, aren't I? Okay, my leg is not straight, so my hamstrings in here are not flexible enough to straighten that leg out. But my hip joints at this point are in a full split, aren't they? Now, I'm not very flexible, but my hip joints have no problem. It's like, that's just normal. I think unless you're a really unflexible person who never does any kind of movement, I think everyone's going to be able to do that. Now, in my mind, the way I understand the body, in that position, if I then gain the flexibility to be able to extend my front leg, that's not moving the hip joint any further. The hip joint is still in the same position. The hip joint's already here, and then the leg just needs to straighten, right? So the hip joint's not moving. Therefore, if I can sit in that position very, very comfortably and naturally, and I've never pushed myself to do that, that's just something, take any child, I bet they can do that. Take any mildly fit person, I bet they can do that. Whereas full splits, most people have a bit too much tension in the hamstrings, and that will stop you from being able to do the full extension of the legs. So the way I understand it, I can't see any reason why doing that, if I can do it very naturally, and I've never even tried, and everyone else seems to be able to do it very naturally without trying. See, this is the big thing, the difference between doing that and the side splits. No one can do side splits without lots and lots of practice and hours of training. Therefore, there's a possible chance they're pushing their bodies beyond their natural limits. But if you can do something without even trying, then obviously that means your body can do that without causing itself a damage. So yeah, that little ligament, if it can sit in that position comfortably, therefore you're not putting any more pressure on that ligament itself. And I can't see how stretching out the hamstring, putting more pressure down through the leg, could put more pressure on that little ligament. Now, your other tendons and ligaments around the outside of the hip joint, maybe, yeah, that's fine. If you stretch this a bit more, that could create a bit more pressure here and create pressure around the other areas on the external muscles. But that's not what we're talking about, creating a problem. We're talking about that little internal tendon. And if the hip doesn't move, nothing else is going to move that tendon. So it's not going to twist anymore. Therefore, it should not be able to tear if you can do that. And I guess that's a pretty good exercise for you to do. Try that. And if you can do that, well, then you just need to get more flexibility in your hamstring to be able to straighten up that front leg. Okay, now, oversplits. This is where maybe you could get into trouble with that little tendon I was talking about, okay? if your back leg, this is where the main problem will come. If you go into that position again, okay, now you'll notice that my pelvis is very much rotated forward. It's like as if I'm like this. So my back leg's, in this position, my back leg is not even stretching. It's not doing anything difficult, right? All the stretch is coming from the front leg. If I sit up, my pelvis hasn't changed. Look, my pelvis is still in the same position. It's my back, my spine, which is bringing me up. I'm curving my spine so it looks like I'm sitting upright, but my hips are still facing downwards. So there's barely any pressure on this back leg. I mean, again, if you've got a lot of tension here, you might feel something, but that's pretty easy, okay, for the average person. Now, if you were to try to stretch that the other way, as in make that leg go past where it naturally goes, you could run into problems. The thought that I had behind this was, if you take a joint and it can go all the way, right, without a problem, but then you put something in its way, such as this. So if I pull on this, for example, I can push my arm in here, right, push it, push it, push it, push it. It's not putting any pressure on my elbow, no matter how hard I push that into here. But if I get a little something, grab my water cup. Sorry, just needed to empty it. If I put that there, that's too bloody big. Anyway, you get the idea. If I pull it down now, I'm creating a lever. I'm putting pressure here. There's something in the middle which can now push that joint out, even though the joint itself can move as far as it wants to move. I mean, obviously until the hand runs into your shoulder kind of thing. But if you put something in its way in the middle and then push here, that's now, when I push down like this, there's no pressure here wanting to pop upwards. When I put this here, now there's pressure wanting to go up at that end. And that's actually how you can apply certain types of knee joint and elbow joint locks in your wrestling martial arts. So you can put something between it. You put your leg or your arm or something in here and then pull on the other guy's leg and you put pressure on the knee because there's that bit in the middle. If that wasn't there and you just did this to him, nothing would happen. So I'm thinking there's a possible chance, a possible link with the back leg only, not the front leg. This is why we gain our flexibility for side splits in the front leg, not the back leg. The back leg is only designed to move about that far backwards. Anything further, and that's the pelvis, you see, that's the whole pelvis. It's not the hip moving. When people push their leg back like that, that's the pelvis, you see. If I put myself into a position like this, the pelvis is tilted forwards. The leg is still in the same position that it was here with reference to the hip socket. Now, the way the shape of the leg works, you got the hip socket here, you got the leg going down, but you got your big bum, okay? You got your glutes there. So when you pull this back, you'll notice anyone doing a big long split like that, the glutes are being squashed almost between this and this. So if you go beyond that point where it's naturally comfortable, you could be doing that same thing I just demonstrated with the cup. Now this is just a thing, an idea I've come up with as to why maybe some people can get into problems with front splits. I haven't researched this and asked my other doctor friends and my chiropractor friends or anything on this one. So please feel free to comment because I'd be very interested to know your thoughts. If there's anyone out there watching who knows a lot about anatomy, this is just an idea that popped into my head. I thought I'd just tag it on the end of this video. But yeah, that's what I feel could be happening. Your bum there is creating a pressure point, and if you try to bend your leg around your bum, you could cause that hip to have a lot more pressure on it where it doesn't need to be. Now, with reference to the front leg in your front splits, coming up this way, as we just said, we can already bring this right up, so we shouldn't have any problems. But perhaps, like I've just demonstrated then, a normal person who's not that much into stretching can go into a 180 degree. If you want to go into splits like this, where your legs are literally going this way in the splits, I don't know. So I would just say, be aware that to me, when I see someone doing it, it looks unnatural to me. No animal does it. No natural person who doesn't really forcefully push their body is going to be able to do that, I think. Okay? So that's where I would say there's a possible chance that if you go beyond that point, maybe then that little tendon, again, not because of the joint can go as far as it wants, but that little tendon in there could be getting twisted too far and could cause you a problem if you're literally bending yourself in two. Okay, so that's all I've got to say on that matter for you all. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that's clarified a few things for those of you who were misunderstanding what I was saying and so on. And for those of you who weren't misunderstanding, I hope it's just given you a little bit of extra insight into how the joints work in the body. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think. Good stuff, guys.